Welcome to the Maura Sweeney Podcast. Maura is an international speaker and the trademark ambassador of happiness with a passion for personal responsibility. She weaves insightful questions with personal stories to challenge your mindsets and empower your best and happiest self from the inside out. Here's Maura with today's podcast for you.
Are you for or against? Well, if you're on a path to living happy from the inside out, you'll find today's podcast definitely worth a listen. Are you for or against? This question came up only recently, and I bring it out to you today because if you are for something, you will find that the force within you to be for an idea, a concept, an ideal is much more empowering and more peaceful and inspiring than working against a presumed or a real foe, which oftentimes brings us down, makes us feel disempowered, angry, frustrated, fearful, and obviously unhappy. For the purposes of today's podcast, I'm going to place this question, are you for or against, into the political framework that exists here in the United States today. Now, before anyone decides they're going to get triggered along the way, don't, because I'm going to cover the left, as in the Democrat side, the right, as in the Republican side. But after that, I'm also going to cover the in-between or the up above or the behind the scenes picture, which when put together will give you a very good indicator as to whether you're going to decide at the end of this podcast to be for or against. First story started out about a week ago. I ran into a friend of mine, a lifelong Democrat, very bright woman, lovely woman, and also quite, I would say, attuned to what's going on. And she happened to stop me and she said, Maura, I need to tell you something. I realized recently that I had to distance myself from some of my friends. And she said, I'm talking about my friends, the Democrats. She said, these are my people. But she said, I realized recently that some of them are so toxic, so negative. She said, so angry in their speech, in their focus. And she said, I'm astute enough to know that to focus in on anything will only reveal more of the same showing up in my life and in my spectrum. And she said, I could see her. She was putting her hand on her chest, her heart area. And she said, this is not good for me, meaning it's not good for my health. It's not good for my well-being. And moreover, she recognized it wasn't good for her sense of happiness. And I just smiled to her and I said, please keep in mind the fact that I'm noticing that there are people on all kinds of extreme ends that are focusing in on the kinds of things that are against. So they are fighting, they're angry, they're thrashing about, and it's negative energy. And I said, believe it or not, I said, people in many areas are just pulling away from that. I said, I saw recently someone's remark that said, if you removed all the labels, all the political labels, you'd find that 80% of the people pretty much agree on all things, with the remaining people on the edges being the ones that are against. So that was the end of that conversation, but it gives some focus to, let's say, the left and certain negative or anti-sentiments that were causing, in my case, my friend to just step away because she did not want to live in the negative territory of fighting against something rather than feeling uplifted, happy for being for something. Story number 2 involves me. Well over 20 years ago, I had been a volunteer for Concerned Women for America, a large pro-family organization based out of Washington, D.C. Now, I loved the opportunity to know what was going on in Washington, to follow legislation, to really educate myself on a lot of what was going on behind the scenes, not only in Washington, but also historically. I enjoyed the process. And for a time, I was the Florida communications coordinator, which meant that I worked with the media in terms of helping Concerned Women for America promote pro-family legislation. I would have been their mouthpiece here. And I loved what I did. But over the course of time, something became apparent to me, much like that of my friend who was on the Democratic side. And I said to one of my fellow volunteers one day, after getting maybe one of the latest reports from Washington's headquarters of Concerned Women for America, this one in particular had to do with our need to fight against the Take Your Daughter to Work Day initiative. And I remember saying to this friend of mine, I said, do you ever notice that we are becoming the no people as opposed to the yes people? I said, I know this is a pro-family organization, but it seems to me more and more that I'm being asked to fight against an initiative or an idea that's being put out on the left, or let's say the Democrat side. And I said, this disturbs me, because if we're part of an organization or part of a movement that's supposed to be pro, as in for something, a positive sense, why do I feel like we're always the naysayers, that we're always against? And I said, I have to tell you something. I feel like I have to turn myself inside out and find fault with the other side. I said, in the case of just this one thing, Take Your Daughter to Work Day, I frankly don't find anything wrong with it. I said, I remember being a 4 or 5-year-old going with my father one day to work. I loved it. And I said it was very empowering. And it also gave me a picture of what the world was like on the outside. I said I enjoyed it. And this was years ago. The point being that I personally felt like I was living in a negative space that was drawing energy away from me because I had to fight against things on the left rather than help promote good ideas that were of an uplifting fashion or an uplifting ideal that was a good thing. It's a sense of where we're going to put our energy. Okay, that was the story on the left. Secondly was the story on the right. Now I'd like to tell you a third story. Many years ago, I had time to spend with Dick Morris. If you're not familiar with Dick Morris, Dick had worked as, I gather, the primary political consultant to Bill and Hillary Clinton from the years that they were in Arkansas, and he followed and or guided them all the way up to the White House. There was a time when Dick Morris had been in the in-between world. Currently, he speaks on Fox News, and he is very much on the right side of the aisle politically. But during this time, he was in the in-between area. And I happened to ask him a question. I said, given the fact that you've had so much political experience, what, in your estimation, is keeping people on the Republican side and on the Democratic side of Congress from working together to solve problems? I said, this is something that I've always wondered about. Well, Dick thought it was the most brilliant question. And to me, I thought it was the most logical question that others must have asked before me. And he said, the answer is that people in Congress on the left and the right can solve their problems within a half hour. And he said, but I want you to know, they never will. Now, he was smiling as if to say, I know the game. But the reason, he said, why they never will solve their problems is that each party needs a fight. Each party needs a foe. And it's in the place of having that foe, having that problem from their perspective that riles up and rises up their own constituent base that will get upset, want to fight, and therefore will help fill their political coffers with campaign donations. So you can see whether it is those fighting against on the left or those fighting against something on the right. Both parties are being used by, would you say, an understanding, a political ploy that operates in both places and is also up above the general population. Now, I want you to think about all of this. It is in the context of politics, but what about your personal life? Are you in a place where you are focusing on a foe? You are taking your energies in a negative way and fighting against something. When we fight against something, we often feel very low. We feel like we're in a constant, continual, losing battle. We're literally expending our energies on something we don't want. But either way, the things we do focus on, we will end up seeing more and more of, because that's the way the mind operates, and that's the way things manifest. So imagine, wherever we may be, to say, how can I change this around a bit? How can I, instead of fighting against something, change my focus and think about an idea, a concept, a solution, something that is worth working toward and proposing and promoting, so that I am for something rather than against something. To be for something, to be pro something, often involves creativity, higher level thinking, hope, expectation of the good. In all those cases, we feel better internally. We're more energized. We're more creative. We're also more likely to bring others with us, because they are drawn to something that is for a bigger, better, brighter idea. Today, wherever you are, give yourself a moment or two, whether it's in the middle of the day and you feel yourself stressed, or at the end of the day when you want to do a few minutes of reflection. Ask yourself if you've been giving your energies away to something you're against. And specifically, if you're against something and giving your energies and your focus to it, ask yourself if you want to see more of that manifest in your life. On the other hand, ask yourself a second question. Now that I've identified the thing that I'm against, is there another way that I can frame the thoughts of my mind and my personal intentions so that I can think about what I am for, that my mind can change a bit, that I could focus in on good, uplifting, empowering ideas that lift up my energy, lift up my expectations and my hope, and more than that, lift up my sense of happiness from the inside out. Well, that's been my thought for you today, hoping that you too will be for something in your life. Until the next time, this has been Maura with More For You.
For more insights on living happy from the inside out, subscribe to this podcast. To learn more about Maura, visit her moraforyou.com website, where you'll find videos, blogs, books, and the Foundations of Happiness self-study e-course. Maura, 4, letter U.com, where Maura is always for you.